Welcome back. So, we have kind of two more things to cover in this lesson. This is a bit of a longer one, but we can do this, guys. So, one thing we got to talk about really quick is the special case of vertical and horizontal lines. So, you get a vertical and a horizontal line, or a horizontal line, when you have an equation that looks like this, where it's just your variable, one of the variables, either x or y, equals a number. So either like this, x equals 2, or like this, y equals -4. Okay? And we got to know how to graph this. So first thing when you graph these is I always pay attention to what variable I have here, because that's going to tell us where we're going to put our first dot. If you have an x there, you are going to put that first dot on the x-axis, or the horizontal axis here. So for this one, I have x equals 2. I'm going to go on the x-axis to 2 and put a dot. For the second one, we have y equals -4. Well, since it's y, we're going to go on the y-axis. So for this one, I go on the y-axis to -4, and I put a dot there. And so you can see that's the first difference between these is you got to pay attention to, is it an x or is it a y? If it's an x, you put it on the x-axis. If it's a y, you put it on the y-axis. Then you need to draw either a vertical or horizontal line. Now, if it is an x equals, that's going to be a vertical line like this, straight up and down. And if it's a y equals, you're going to have a horizontal line like this, so flat like that. Right, and you probably can do a better job than I did there of getting it actually on the line there. Now, you could memorize x equals is a vertical line or y equals is a horizontal line. You could memorize that. I actually didn't really ever memorize that when I was in school. I found that hard to do. What I remember is, okay, first we put our dot down. So x equals 2, we'd go to the x-axis, put it on 2. Y equals -4, we go on the y-axis to -4. And then you have two ways to choose from. You have horizontal or vertical. One of those ways, and I don't draw this in your notes because it is incorrect, one of those ways traces over an axis. So if I drew a horizontal line on this one, notice it would trace over the x-axis. We don't want to do that. So this one, we don't trace over the axis, we go the other way, it's a vertical line. Okay? And the same thing would happen here. So this one we went to -4 on the y-axis, put a dot. And then what I always remember is you have your two options. You have horizontal and vertical. Well, in this case, vertical would trace over the axis, so we don't want to do that. We're going to go and do it horizontal. All right, that's just how I remember it. You can memorize x equals is vertical, y equals is horizontal. It's up to you. But that's, find a way to memorize that. I always just remember don't trace over the axis, go the other way. All right. So that's vertical and horizontal lines. You'll see some of those. And then we have one more thing to talk about, which is graphing inequalities. So you are going to have some inequalities that you want to graph. And remember, an inequality is when we don't have an equal sign anymore. We have an inequality sign, a less than or greater than, a less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. Now, how we graph these, and I'll talk through this specifically in a second here, but to graph these, we start the same exact way that we would before. We identify our slope, and we identify our y-intercept. Right, and so in this case, our slope would be a +3. Our y-intercept would be a -2. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to put those on the graph exactly how we would before. So our y-intercept is -2. We go down to -2, put a dot. Our slope is 3, which remember is the same as 3/1. So we have a rise of 3, a run of 1. And so we'll go up 3 to the right 1, up 3 to the right 1. Up 3 to the right 1, or we could go down 3, left 1. All right, and so we have our dots down, but now is where we have a difference. And that first difference is the line is not always just going to be a solid line anymore. It might be a dashed line. And how it works is really simple. If you have a less than or a greater than, in other words, one that doesn't have the equals sign on the bottom here, it doesn't have a line down there, then that is a dashed line or a dotted line. If you do have the equals sign down there, or basically you have a line down there, it is a solid line. So on this one, we have the equals. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw a solid line there, and hopefully you can draw straighter than me. It's tough with a mouse here. Okay? All right, and so we put that down. The second thing you need to do within inequalities, you need to shade. Because basically within an inequality, all our solutions are either going to be above the line or they're going to be below the line. And what you want to do with this is you want to go ahead and you want to look at the y. And what we want to ask ourselves is y bigger or smaller than over here? In other words, is it greater or is it less than? And how we look at that, remember, is we see which way the inequality sign is facing. If the open end faces the y, then y is greater. So that's like this case. If that's the case, if y is the bigger one, right, the open end faces it, then you want to shade above the line. And so what I mean by above the line is if you just go on the line anywhere, doesn't matter where, and you go straight up, you will end up on one of the two sides. Well, in this case, if I go straight up, I end up on this side over here. That is above the line. And so we shade over there. If we had it the other way, if this had been like this, y is less than or equal to 3x minus 2, right? The pointy end faces the y. That's when we shade below, because y is less than and smaller numbers are below. Okay? So let's look at one more example here. Actually, two more examples here, and then that's what we're doing in this lesson. It's just a bunch of graphing. So this example, we've got y is less than negative 2/5 x plus 1. So first, identify our slope and y-intercept. Our slope would be negative 2/5. And then our y-intercept, well, that's going to be 1. So we go on our graph, y-intercept is 1, so go on the y-axis to 1, put a dot. Then our slope would be negative 2/5. Remember, with the negative, we can either go down 2 and right 5, or we could go up 2 and left 5. Put those down. Then we got to draw our line. In this case, we look at this, we don't have the equals sign, and so this has to be a dotted or dashed line. And then we have to shade. And so remember, we look at the y and we say, okay, well, is y the bigger one or the smaller one? Well, in this case, the pointy end faces the y. That means it is smaller. We need to shade below. So go onto your line, go straight down, and that's the side you want to shade. All right? Now, there's one more thing I want to remind you. You all are also going to get some that are not in slope-intercept form. You just want to go ahead, you want to solve this for y, just like normal. And so here's our middle of the inequality. We go ahead, we got to subtract the x's from both sides. Right? And let's see, we'd end up with negative 4y is greater than negative 3x plus 12. Then we got to divide by negative 4. And this is the part where I wanted to remind you. First of all, remember, divide everything, right? I have to divide both terms here, negative 3x and 12. I have to divide them both. And then second of all, if you remember from last week, if we divide by a negative, we have to switch the sign around. And so we'll have y is less than, this would end up being a positive 3/4 x minus 3. That's our equation in slope-intercept form. That's the equation you want to graph. Okay? So that's what we're doing in this lesson. You are going to be doing a bunch of graphing. You're going to graph equations in slope-intercept form and not in slope-intercept form, so you got to get it in slope-intercept form. And you're going to graph some inequalities. Again, some in slope-intercept form, some not, but remember, you got to look out. Is it a dotted or a solid line? and do shade above or below. So good luck, guys. Let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, let's make sure we can do this. I know this is a review, but like we got to make sure we can do this before we move on to tougher stuff.